Some people say that there's no one dumber than idiots in Reddit comments, but I disagree. What about idiots that listen to them? Today, we're trying completely blindly a deck list I found in a Reddit comment. This is the start of something new I'm calling Yu-Gi-Oh! Trash to Tournament. Okay, let's slow it down just a smidge. Yes, everything you just heard is completely true. This is a deck list I found randomly online a little while ago by this user right here. It is Superheavy Mikanko TrapTrix. And yes, just like the name suggests, it should not work. And to some degree, it does or doesn't. I don't really know. The biggest thing I wanted to do was try this out because I love Mikanko. I think it's one of the best decks Yu-Gi-Oh's ever put out. Is it the most competitive? Not really. Is it one of the most fun? Yes. It's got inventive mechanics. It's a very fun archetype that people a lot of times don't see coming. And as long as you don't get hit by Droll and Lockbird, it actually works pretty well. The problem is that its best friend, Libromancer, got hit indirectly in a way that I don't think anybody expected with the banning of Isolde. Also, two of the boss monsters I would end on, Apollosa and Baron de Fleur, also got banned, meaning that the deck, it saw better days. So when I found someone online saying they had a way to make multiple negates and set up an end board that's consistent, you know I had to bust that out. And cook it did, as we went completely blind into our locals tournament at that computer store, using the most current banned list, the most current set of cards, with a deck with 0 hand traps against Snake Eye and Fiendsmith Ubel. Yeah, you heard that right. Because I built this deck completely off of a Reddit list, it had no space at 57 cards for any hand traps or any side deck. Theoretically, it doesn't need a side deck necessarily. You've got TrapTrix to help you going first, you have Mikanko to help you going second, and you have Superheavy Samurai in that engine to help you kind of patch together some sort of board no matter where you're playing. But once again, we're going up against Fiendsmith Ubel, we're going up against Snake Eyes, we're going up against Azamina, all with no hand traps whatsoever. It's not exactly the best strategy in mind, but it is one we're going to attempt. On a personal note, just so you're aware, this is a 60 card deck. It was 57 initially, and I added 3 cards to it to help with consistency. And I noticed that it is really hard to shuffle a double-sleeved 60-card deck. I literally cannot hold this in one hand to shuffle it. I don't know if you're gonna be able to pick it up, but like to shuffle it, I have to kind of go like this because there's no way to comfortably shuffle it. When my opponents would cut my deck, a lot of them, like to do that quick shuffle they do for you. They couldn't do it with my deck because it does not work. So I'm pretty sure every single card in here was bent or potentially dropped or run over, stepped on, something like that, because this just, it's too much. It's too much. I should have single sleeved it. I wanted to use Yu-Gi-Oh sleeves like the official ones I got from Mavens, but it was a bad call on my part. All that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at the deck profile. Let's start by showing off the deck itself, and first thing I want to talk about is the beautiful deck box that it is going to be in. This is one of my favorites. It's from Mana Moon. I got it forever ago. The art on the inside is also just super pretty, but it's just so well made. It's really cool. You've got your main set. You've got this little pocket over here to hold your dice and counters. It's just, this deck box is great. So very excited to be using it. I just like showing it off. The deck itself, like I said, is pre-made. I did make a couple changes that we'll go over, but to start off with, we do have our Superheavy Samurai package. So we have 3 copies of Superheavy Samurai Prodigy Wakashi. He is at, like, full combo for Superheavy Samurai stuff right off the bat. And the big thing with the Superheavy Samurai stuff is it is a rank 4 toolbox. So between Motorbike and Wakashi, these are both full Superheavy combo for what we're doing in the deck. As long as we have either of those in our starting hand, we're good to go. We're then going to run 1 copy of Soul Gaia Booster and 1 copy of Monk Big Benkei. This is just part of the combo, so use Motorbike, discard it to search Wakashi, scale Wakashi, grab a copy of Benkei, and then summon Wakashi, Benkei scale, grabs you Soul Gaia Booster. Soul Gaia Booster equips to Wakaushi. Soul Gaia Booster summons itself, and now you can make a rank 4, which is why we're also running a copy of Double or Nothing. This was not in the original deck build, but we had, I think, 57 cards, so I added 2 more just to kind of help with some consistency. In case we're going second and we just need something to be able to punch over, Double or Nothing was super easy, especially because we had room in the extra deck. So that is entirely it for the super heavy stuff. We're running none of the extra deck, none of the synchro plays, anything like that. Let's move right along into the Mikanko stuff, and this is what I'm very familiar with. Mikanko's a deck I've played quite a good bit over time. So we're going to start off with 3 copies of Mikanko Jewel Huli. This is probably the best of the Mikanko main deck monsters that isn't the Ritual. Just prevents anything from being targeted, destroyed, all that kind of good stuff, and can search out some of your traps, and the traps in this deck are very, very important. We've got 2 copies of Hare, one of the best normal summons in the deck, provided you can get an equipped spell to go with her. She's just awesome. Your plays become very circular, just super helpful. And then 1 copy of Nini. Nini is a card you never want to draw into, but can be useful if you want to extend or play on your opponent's turn a little bit, since she is the only Mikanko with a quick effect that is not the Ritual. Finally, you've got 3 copies of the Ritual Ohime, the Manifested Mikanko. Genuinely one of the best cards in the game. I know that the Mikanko strategy itself is not the best anymore, but Ohime genuinely is. She's incredible. So if you can get her, you've pretty much got full Mikanko combo in and of itself. Speaking of, when you're pretty much always going to be searching off of Ohime, is 3 copies of the Great Mikanko Ceremony. It allows you to cheat out the Ritual monster, as well as get access to one of the equip spells that Ohime can then equip to whatever monster you want. We're also running 3 copies of Mayo Washi Dori. Part of that is in case we're dumping anything to the grave, we can easily revive a Mikanko monster, and that becomes really, really useful. It's also just one of the best equip spells in the game. We're running 1 copy of Reflection Rondo, which the deck did not originally call for, but it's such a good card that I can't not run it, especially with Ohime, being able to quick equip and snatch steal. 2 copies of Fire Dance, running out of room here. Fire Dance, honestly, I could probably end up bumping down. And this was in the original deck profile, so I didn't want to change too much. Fire Dance, it does the job. It's good because it can cheat out one of your Mikanko monsters in hand if you just need to get something on field, but it's not my favorite. We're running 3 copies of Mikanko Water Arabesque, including the copy I have that is crimped, which I really like. It is the best equipped spell in the deck. I think it's Arabesque is 1, Mayo Washi Dori is 2. It's incredible. It can absolutely be used against your opponent. It can be used with your monsters. It's just always good. Finally, we're running 1 copy of Rivalry and 1 copy of Spirit Walk. In my opinion, Spirit Walk is probably the best Mikanko trap in the game. Rivalry does give you a little bit of interaction with your opponent, and it's really good on like a turn 3 situation where you went first. I think Spirit Walk is infinitely better at removal. And finally, we have 3 copies of Mikanko Promise. It's just a way to cheat out your Mikanko monsters. So all in all, amazing, amazing little toolbox. This is probably one of my favorite pet decks I've ever played. I played it for almost an entire year. It lost a lot when Isolde got banned. It was just really good Believermancer stuff. But in this deck, in case you are going second, this is really your response, because TrapTrix do not like going second. They like going first, setting up traps, all that kind of stuff. And speaking of TrapTrix, we do have 3 copies of TrapTrix Mermelio. We're running 3 copies of Mantis and 2 copies of Pudica. We're running 2 copies of Dionea, 2 copies of Arachnacampa, and 1 copy of Vesiculo. Now, I will be perfectly honest with you, like I said in this video already, I was not too familiar with the TrapTrix strategy. Honestly, Arachnacampa, one of the best extenders I was able to find, so was Pudica. The others, Mantis and Mermello was pretty much always good to see in my hand, so this is probably the right ratio for this type of deck, but I'm just not sure entirely. 2 copies of Garden I think is pretty standard. You can search it out relatively easy off of Sarah, so Garden is just really good to have. And then for the traps, 3 copies of Holtea. Watching some combo videos after the fact, I think Holtea actually is probably the best card in the TrapTrix strategy, at least for extensions. And it just makes the combos so much more fluid. I was not using it to its full potential, but that's fine. 2 copies of Floodgate Trap Hole, one of the best trap cards in this deck. Gravedigger's Trap Hole, I think, is probably the best, especially when you have something like Rafflesia on board. It's just super helpful at just stopping hand traps or any hand effects from your opponent. We got one copy of Bottomless, one copy of TrapTrix Trap Hole Nightmare, and one copy of Void Trap Hole. Rarely was I searching out any of these three in particular. Pretty much I was always going for Floodgate or Gravediggers or Holtea. But these three cards, just as final versions of your kind of like toolbox, are good. And if you know what your opponent's playing and you know it very well, these three can be really good at like particular disruptions as opposed to general disruptions. So definitely good options, just not what I was necessarily looking into running. And last but not least, we'll take a look at the extra deck. Once again, this is mostly pre-built. You can see kind of my additions to it, and I'll go over those and why. But first things first, we have 3 copies of TrapTrix Sarah. We have 1 copy of TrapTrix Colaria, 2 copies of TrapTrix Rafflesia, 1 copy of TrapTrix Alamaris, and 1 copy of TrapTrix Pingicula. I have no idea how to say that name, but I think this is a pretty standard Tri-Brigade or TrapTrix package to add in. Sarah is easily the best to go into. Alamaris can be really useful for a resource loop. Rafflesia, of course, is your quick effect trap. That is just really great. It works really well with all the different rank 4 toolbox plays we can do, especially with like the super heavy engine, because 2 super heavy cards basically get you any of these 3 TrapTrix extra deck monsters. So that's really useful. As long as you get a TrapTrix on board, you've got Sarah access, and that's just really good. Next thing, it's a pretty standard extra deck inclusion, IP Masquerena, just in case we need to go into something really quick. I didn't have a copy of SP Little Knight for this deck. That's fine. Don't really need one in my opinion, but I mean, it's always better to have it than not. IP is really good. Inclusion, World Dragon Zealantis, of course, easy extra deck staple, as well as access code talker in case we need to go for a different type of turn 2 OTK. Access code's just incredible. Speaking of turn 2 OTK, I did run 1 copy of Utopia and 1 copy of Utopia Double to really benefit off of the rank 4 package, because we get a chance to run something like Double or Nothing, which is just super helpful. And then finally we ran a personal pet project of mine. That's weird to say, but it's 1 copy of Bujinki Ahashima and 1 copy of number 75 Bamboozling Gossip Shadow. And so the idea is, if you have Mikanko monsters in your hand and field, you can quick link into Ahashima, and then use Ahashima to quick Xyz into Bamboozling Gossip Shadow, so you have a negate, you have a trap or spell banish. It's just a really cool like complementary thing when you don't have much to do because you've drawn kind of a dead hand. It is super helpful as like a resource. So all in all, it's not the best extra deck in the world. It's not something as safe as like what Snake Eyes can put up, but it's pretty decent. I think the inclusions that I was able to do made the deck as good as it could be. These obviously were the cards that were kind of designed for me. Yeah, it's not great, but I do want to go ahead and give it a shot. I am going to restrict myself, not practicing any combos. I want to see how it goes if I do this completely blind, and then later on, maybe take it after I've tested it out a couple times. I know how Mikanko works, so I feel relatively comfortable there, but I don't really know how TrapTrix works, and luckily, Super Heavy is pretty simple. Our goal at the tournament with this deck is not to win. I want to clarify that. We're not trying to get first place. We're not trying to beat all the meta and everything else. I just would like to win 1 match. Preferably 1 match. I'll take 1 game, but preferably 1 match. Realistic expectations is that if we can win 2 games, I'll consider this to be a success. We're going up against some really good duelists, especially that computer store as I'm becoming more and more familiar. Everyone's really good and kind of knows what's going on. So the idea of us being able to crush someone, take them over, beat them, whatever it might be, relatively low odds of success, I think. But our chance of potentially winning a couple games, that's doable. We can put our opponents in some pretty uncomfortable board states, especially when we have things like our TrapTrix package. We've got Ohime on board and set up. We can do a lot to interrupt our opponent and not let them play their game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And then beat them down on the clapback with this deck, assuming we get to go first. So it's not impossible for us to win. It is just highly unlikely. But it's time, without any more dawdling, let's get over to locals. Game 1, we're going up against Heroes, and here's the thing. Heroes are not a great strategy. Everyone can tell you that. The problem is heroes are really good when their hands are good and they don't get interrupted, because no one is complaining about the heroes inboard. And unfortunately, game one, that's kind of what happens to us. It's a 17-minute game, and it's almost entirely my opponent setting up a really good board. Dark Law in particular shuts down our deck. It's Dimension Shifter, plus it's a copy of Ash Blossom. I mean, it's good. So all in all, we can't really do it. Game two is a little bit more interactive. Game two comes, and I'm actually feeling pretty good. We have a good hand for Mikanko. We're able to get out pretty much everything we want to, and while, yes, Mikanko doesn't have a ton of negates in the traditional sense, it's also really hard to beat over. And we're in a really good spot, but then something unbelievable happens to us. We get beat over in the battle phase playing Mikanko, which has never happened to me ever. I still don't understand the mechanics because I don't know heroes all that well, and I probably should learn them. But yes, that is true. Our battle phase, we lose playing Mikanko with a full Mikanko board. It's crazy. But one thing I really think it does go to show is how cool, one, our opponent was. He was awesome. And two, how cool it is that Heroes cards can be that adaptive, that fun, able to do things that you wouldn't normally expect them to be able to do, including beating over a battle phase deck. I mean, it's just really cool. So all in all, big ups to my opponent, big ups to the hero strategy. I must have been sleeping on it, and we're going into game two. Game two was up against our boy Colby, and if game one was hard against heroes, game two we're going up against Fiendsmith Ubel, playing a deck with no hand traps and no called by and no anything really. So it's an uphill battle for sure. Also, you'd think that maybe Mikanko could play a little against Ubel because they're both battle phase decks with zero attack. It does not work like that. Game two is comprised of two very long duels. And part of that is because I have no interruptions going up against someone who's competent but still new to using Fiendsmith Ubel, which means they get to go full combo even when they don't necessarily know exactly how they want to go full combo. So game one, they go a long time in their first turn. They're able to set up an inboard with a copy of Caesar, a copy of the Fiendsmith Fusion, Phantom of Ubel, and I think a copy of Engraver. And we have to try and play through that, and we absolutely cannot. We do our absolute best drawing a TrapTrix and Superheavy heavy hand to try and burst through anything, see if we can get any sort of like trap set, anything like that, so we can maybe take them down on the clapback. I don't know, just kind of testing things out. Unfortunately, no, that is not the case. So we do end up taking a pretty hefty loss game one, and I will be 100% transparent with you. I do not think that we are going to get to play in this game. I have complete faith that we are about to get completely blown out in this match. We have no way of competing with this deck. This is the best in the format, and we are going to get destroyed. Then we have the most insane game two I've ever seen. Game two is a slugfest. There is tons of back and forth between me and Colby. I get to go first, and I set up a pretty decent, kind of okay TrapTrix field. Because of some unbelievable luck, we're able to stop him from establishing a really good Ubel board. This means that we have an actual chance of playability. So, on the following turn, we're able to get into a copy of Hare. Hare is crucial because now we have a way to do battle damage to this deck. Yes, it is a little crazy to be able to do this, but we use Hare to be able to attack into him, able to deal some damage, and now we're running into a real issue of time because this game is going long. He starts his next turn, he can't really get anywhere. He ends on a copy of Little Knight and a copy of Phantom of Ubel. And that is when we draw for turn the one card that seals the deal. Mikanko Water Arabesque. Arabesque prevents the equipped monster from being able to be destroyed. So, if we equip it to Phantom of Ubel, he cannot use the effect of Phantom of Ubel to destroy itself. It's impossible to be used. So, we can then bounce it back to hand. Instead, what he does is he links it off for a copy of SP. This allows us, if the game had continued, to go into attack and destroy him for game. But we hit time. Now that doesn't sound great, except remember how I told you we did battle damage earlier? That's right. We won a game against Fiendsmith Ubel with this weird toolbox deck, resulting in a match draw. I know a draw is not a win. Objectively, that is the case. But for what we're doing, we drew out against Fiendsmith Ubel with an unbelievably crap deck. That was incredible. Thank you very much, Colby, for being such a good sport about it. But that was awesome. So this is a success. In my book, this is a success. The energy in the shop at this point is electrifying. People are so excited. My deck is objectively very funny. People are wanting it to win. It's not, because I'm not good at it. It's not good, but it is so fun. And this draw genuinely changed the mood in the card shop that night. Then we come to game 3, where I have to play against one of the decks I hate the most in Yu-Gi-Oh! Torunament. Or more accurately, Danger Torunament, but God. Tier format was the worst. Game 1, we get to go first. We do win the die roll. We start with the Superheavy Samurai engine, which is able to help us get into the TrapTrix stuff. This is a good development for us, as we're able to actually prevent our opponent from doing everything they want to do. They open up a couple copies of Nessie, they open up a Mothman. It's not entirely anything we can really work with, but we are able to stop them from completely overwhelming us with tier. We're able to set up a relatively decent Mikanko board on turn 3. There's a turn 4 back and forth, and then by turn 5, when they Underworld Goddess us, we're able to get out a copy of Ohime and then a copy of Huli, attack them, and win the game, putting us at 1-0. This is crazy. We are in range to have a positive win record, or I guess technically a neutral one overall, which would be crazy. All we have to do is we have 2 more games we get to play. All we have to do is win one of them, and we can take it. We go into game 2, and it is hard. He goes first, and we have no interruptions because this deck runs 0 hand traps. He's able to establish a really, really good board for us to go up against. And unfortunately, we don't really draw anything Mikanko-wise we can play with. Our TrapTrix stuff gets stopped, negated, etc. And game 2 ends up being a pretty big wash, which leads us into game 3. Game 3, I'll be honest, I was a little worried about time. I did not know how we were going to be able to do. We go first, and unlike turn 1, we don't draw into the same gas that I thought we could get into. We set up a piddly little board. He's able to establish a pretty decent Torunaments board overall. We go into try and do something. We get Underworld Goddess again, and that ends up being all she wrote. We have no way of defeating him. He's able to take us out, and unfortunately, we end the match 1-2. And that's where we end it. Seeming pretty dour. Except, we actually did everything we wanted. We got everything we wanted to do, we were able to do. 2 games, we won. And yes, we wanted to win 1 match, but drawing against Fiendsmith Ubel, that's pretty sick, objectively. So, yes, the record wasn't great. And if it was any other deck we were playing or any other series, yeah, I'd be a little bummed. This was incredible. So now, let's review the cards we were using. Yes, there are some problems. Objectively, I don't think anyone's blown away by that just seeing the deck list. I don't think anyone is going to be surprised if I tell you you probably shouldn't play this if you want to win games. What you might be surprised about is that I would tell you this is actually not a bad starting point. The deck itself is pretty cheap by now. Everything that is in there has been reprinted to, high heaven. So with the 10s and everything else, this deck is really cheap to put together. So if you're starting out, it's not the worst. Yes, it's a little combo heavy, and that can be a little bit tricky. I'll give you that, 100%. But it's not unbelievably combo heavy, and it's actually pretty easy to learn. It's effectively 3 different combo lines, and you're pretty much done. It's not complicated. You don't have to worry about hand traps, and everyone in your card shop is relatively going to know how each of these engines work. So yes, it will sound dumb when you pull up with Superheavy Mikanko TrapTrix. But everybody's going to know all 3 and are going to be willing to work with you. I don't hate this. I actually think there's a world in which this could be optimized. I don't know what that optimization looks like, and I want to play with some ratios a little bit. Effectively, what we want to do is be able to keep the same ratios while slimming down the deck profile to make room for hand traps. Yes, we will not be able to go off quite as much. And there might even be an argument for getting rid of Super Heavy Samurai overall. But being able to disrupt our opponent is always going to be more important than being able to set up a board that is easily broken. Part of the reason is that the traps that TrapTrix sets up sometimes aren't as impactful as something like an Ash Blossom or a Droll Lockbird, even if they do go off. So it's a little hard to recommend playing 0 hand traps and 0 real negates if you're relying on the traps that TrapTrix themselves can set up. But I think this is a good start, and I actually do want to do more of these style videos in the future. I don't know if this is going to be a series. I don't know if this is going to be anything, but I really enjoyed this. This was fun. If you have ever come across a dumb deck profile, if you ever made a dumb deck profile, let me know in the comment section down below, and I guarantee at some point, might not be for a while, we're going to run it at TCS. Thank you so much for watching, and like we always say here, I hope to see you around sometime.